Okay, so what I would like to start with today is to go over one of the assignments that you turned in. We had done the assignments that you turned in for the most part were the redo of Sunny, and we did that in class, so there's not much else there to go over again. I thought everybody did a reasonably good job for the most part. But what I would like to do is go over really quickly those 3 different methods to knock out that figure. So if you go to session 5, inside of session 5 in your assignment folder, there is that 081025_VER. It's the one you were supposed to simply knock out. If we can do this right now, we're going to knock it out. I'm going to show you the 3 methods really quickly. So can everybody find this file? The other reason you want to find this file is that it's going to be part of your homework. So we're actually starting your homework. We're not going to do the retouching on this, but we will do the knockout so that you at least have a good place to start. So was anybody not able to find this file? Okay, so I'm not going to go all the way through every possible step of all of this because some versions of this are simply better than other versions of this. But it will be a quick sort of refresher about the strategies that we have to go about grabbing this stuff. So the first move I'm going to make is to try and actually separate this using channels. So if you come over to your channels palette, lower right hand side, and simply click on the red. So when we talk about clicking on stuff, depends on where you click is what you really get. So if you click on the area, so I'm going to click on the red channel. If you click in the sort of like the body of the red channel in the middle, it will then only show you the red channel. It gets rid of everybody else. It turns off all the other eyeballs for everybody else. So you don't see anything else in here. And this is actually the red channel. And again, what we're looking for here is separation between the background and the figure. The issue that I have with this is that the figure itself, for the white of her skin, separates really well from the background, but the hair is almost identical in color to the background. So this is not a good channel for me to separate the hair, and the hair is the real challenge in this. So I'm going to take a look down at the green channel, and if you click on the green channel, I have much more separation between the hair and the background. So this is a better candidate for me than is the red one. And then finally, we're going to look at the blue one, and the blue one suffers the same problem as the red one. The color of the hair is really close to the color of the background, so that's not going to work for me. So I'm going to make a copy of my green channel. So I've just selected the green channel. I'm going to drag it down to the little square with the plus in it at the very bottom of the channels palette. Let go. This will actually make a green copy. I'm going to double click on this, and I'm just going to call it Knockout 1. And then we're going to actually try to get this to separate. So I'm going to zoom in. If you take a look at the curls that are on the top of her head, there's a series of really big sort of loopy curls. If you think of her face as a clock face, this would be about 3 o'clock. I'm going to zoom into that area because this is where I see the greatest promise. So I'm into this area right here, and again, when you go into here and you look for areas to pick to actually develop the different levels of your mask, it's important that you understand what it is you're really trying to pick. So if I look at the area, look up at my screen here where I'm talking about, if I look at the area of the curls up in here, there's just a ton of really loose, feathery, transparent hair there. So this is not something that I want to be completely black in my mask. If it is, it's actually going to be my mask is going to be far too aggressive. So when I look at that, that's an area I want to avoid. When I look at this area right down here, if I think of this curl as a clock face, right down here around that 6 o'clock, 6:30 area, there's also way too much transparency in here. That's not a good option for me. However, if I look at the curl on the outside edge, again, that sort of more 3 o'clock area right there, that's actually looks like a good area for me. That would be a good sample area for me to take. Again, I would stay away from this sort of like really light grays in here, but that area over there actually looks like a good target for me. So that's where I'm going to put a color sampler point. To get to the color sampler points, over to your toolbar, it's the color sample. It's the tool that actually looks like an eyedropper. But you need to click on this to get the drop-down menu. We're not going to select the eyedropper. We are going to select the color sampler tool because that will leave a mark on the, that will leave a sampler point on any place that we put it on the image. So that's what I'm going to pick, the color sampler tool. And I'm going to come over and I'm going to pick the darker area that's sort of at the top of that. and I'm going to click and put down a color point. Now you need to make sure that your sample size up at the top is a 3x3. And then finally, for this point number 1 that we've just laid down, you'll see that it comes in a CMYK color palette. That's not going to help us here. We want to actually see these values in RGB. So if you click on the little eyedropper under the number 1 in the info palette, you'll get a fly down menu, and you can say, you can pick a whole range of things that you want to see this in. I want to see this in an RGB color readout, so I'm going to select RGB color readout, and in my case I get 49s. You should have something that's close to this. It may not be exact, but it should be relatively close to this. Then I need to actually throw a point down in the background. Now if you take a look at this area, I'm going to zip back out. There's no real good clean area that I can pick a point from that's in this same vicinity as this. Because you need to worry about if you try to actually hit the target of the background right above it, if you zoom in here to this area that's right above it, are you certain that this is only background right here? There's too much other hair that's actually in here for me to feel like I can hit a point that's only going to be background. So I'm going to avoid this area altogether. I'm going to zip down here underneath, so an area that's more closer to the side of her ear. So I'm going to zip back out so you can see where I'm going. So just this area right down in here, I'm going to click and put another sample point out there. And then again, over to my info palette for point number 2 now, click on that drop down eyedropper and say RGB color readout as well. So now I've got what I'm targeting to do. I want the first point right here that's in the 49s, I want that to go to black, so that needs to mean those need to go to 0. And then the 139s, I need those to actually be white, so I need those to go up to 255. So Command L will bring up the levels dialog box. Once we do that, I'm going to just grab the lower point underneath the left side of the histogram, the shadow point, and I'm going to click on that and start dragging it towards the center, and the entire time I'm looking at the after readout of my point number 1. You can see right now I've actually changed this. The values in any point when you're actually doing a curve like this, you get those 2 values. The value on the left is the original point, the value on the right is the change. So in this case, mine is changed to 26. I need to get it to 0, but using your slider here, you don't want to go all the way to 0. You want to get close to 0, like I'm at a 4 right now, and I'm going to stop. And then I go to my arrow keys, and I'm going to tap this in one at a time. It's the up arrow key. And the reason I do the arrow keys is that I need to do the absolute minimum it takes to reach 0 for this, the targeting point that I'm going for. And the flip side holds true for the highlight point, for the white point. I want to do the minimum adjustment it takes to get me to that white, because anything beyond the minimum adjustments is going to be too aggressive a mask. So I'm going to grab my white point slider, that's the white point underneath the histogram all the way on the right hand side, click and start to drag that back towards the center. And again, I'm looking at my readout on the side that's actually after the my point number 2. I'm going to get close to 255. I'm going to stop and back it up. I'm at a 252 right now, so then I'm going to go to my also to my arrow keys and start to tap till I just get 255. You'll notice that when I did that change, it actually brought value back into my shadow point. So my shadow point is now reading a 1. So I'm simply going to select my shadow point. So I just drug my cursor across the 49 that's right underneath the histogram, and I'm going to go back to my arrow keys. And so now I've got a 0 and a 255. So that part is correct. I'm going to move my curve, my levels out of the way, and what I'm really looking for again is just this area of hair, and this is exactly what I was talking about right here. There's areas of the hair in here that I feel like are actually, it's still holding that whole transparency part in here, which is what I'm really looking for this to do. So you can see if we zoom into this area over in here, some of these lighter areas, this is going to let some of that background come through, which is what we really want. Take a look at my screen, don't do this, but this is what I would say would be a too aggressive a mask. I'm going to push this up so that I get some of these areas right here that are that have transparency in them, to get them to go solid black. So I'm going to just keep cranking this up. And you can see now I've actually got those areas to be solid black, but take a look at my mask right now here. This is far too aggressive. This is not going to have any sort of nice fall off, any sort of nice transition from being hair into the background part. This is just, it's just far too aggressive in here for me. So I'm going to take this back where it was, and I'm going to then use the preview button to turn this on and off and see, am I really holding the detail of this fine hair? This is all I care about. I'm not looking at her skin. I'm not looking at any of that part. I'm simply looking at the hair part in here and saying, do I feel like that's a good edge? And I do feel like that's a good edge. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. Then I'm going to hit a B key to get the brush. I'm going to change the blending mode of my brush to overlay. I'm going to make my brush larger. I do want to keep this a really hard brush, so I'm going to crank it up to around a 75% because I'm going to be working in areas where I don't want to overspray into the soft transparent areas. And actually I'm going to start this out as a normal brush. I'm not going to go to overlay quite yet. And there's areas now here, you can see all of these areas that are highlights on her hair, all of that, sorry, I need 100% opacity in that. 100% flow, and black needs to be my foreground color. All of this needs to be painted in using black. As I start to get near these areas that are closer to the edge, I need to actually be careful of that. I don't want to hit those edges or spray out into those edges, so I'm going to change my blending mode to an overlay brush and start to work my way into all of those areas. And so this is basically how I would go about doing this. Then to finish doing the figure, her face, all of that, I would actually go in here with the pen tool and actually pen tool the edge of her face out, and I would be off to the races. However, you can see this is the worst of the methods that you could possibly use to try to build this. Because again, I never started out, I didn't have a great channel to start out with. If you had a great channel to start out with and this was all falling into place, that would be one thing, but that's not what's happening here. So I'm not going to go any further with this one. I'm going to go to process number 2. So my process number 2, if you go up to the very top and select the RGB channel again, the composite channel, I'm going to double click on the hand to get it to be larger. Instead, this time I'm going to do a color range. So I'm going to come up to the select menu, click on the drop down for the select menu and come down to color range. When color range first opens up, if you take a look, you should get a dialog box and you should also get a preview on your screen. Your preview probably looks untouched. It looks just like the image. And then you can see you have a very small preview that is in the color range dialog box. If you click on the drop down menu, you can come down to greens and you can get a preview, and you can see your preview of what's sort of going on in the very small spot right here. I'm actually going to then, I like to see a larger preview. To see a larger preview, click on the selection preview drop-down menu in the color range dialog box and simply come down to grayscale. And now your image will mirror what's going on in the in the small color range preview part. So what? Did you You good? All right. So this, to me, is a better beginning to actually work with than the channel, the green channel that we had to work with right here. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. And now what this has done is it's giving me this warning. It's saying no more pixels than 50% were selected. You do not need to worry about this. All this is doing is saying you have to have a greater than 50% of the pixels selected in order to get the marching ants. We don't have marching ants, but we don't need them. But the selection is still going. So we're going to save this selection. So come up to the select menu, down to save selection, and we're just going to call this color range knockout. And say okay to that. And then if you scroll to the bottom of your channels palette, you'll see the alpha channel we just made, color range knockout. Now in this case, I can sort of do the same thing. I'm going to zip in here and take a look at my first color point right here. That first color point I don't really need, so I'm going to start off with a brand new set of color points. Right. You don't have need threshold of 50% of the cases to be selected for marching. That's what that warning is all about. Okay, so again, one of my color points here is meaningless to me. It's not really going to help me out where it is up here in the corner part. So I'm going to get rid of those. So come back over to your tool palette, click on the eyedropper again, down to the color sampler tool, and then you'll see up at the very top in your options bar, there's a clear all. Click on clear all. Those are now gone. I am going to look around on her face. I don't see any, typically on her face, a lot of times you'll see catch lights in her eyes. You'll see highlights in the moisture of their eyes, that kind of stuff, whatever. I don't see anything like that, so I don't need to worry about that part here. You can throw down a color sampler point right in the middle of her head. That would be fine too. And then I'm going to throw another color sampler point out into the background out here, pretty close to where I had one before. So again, same trick. I'm going to come over and change my eyedroppers to read out RGB as opposed to CMYK. So an RGB readout and then another RGB readout. And you can see already I'm much better off in the beginning of this because I've gotten her entire face. I've got all of those parts are actually working for me. So Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. In this case, my figure is already at 0, so I'm just going to change the highlight part of this. So I'm going to grab the highlight part and start to kick it back. And again, I'm looking at my after readout right here. And I'm going to continue to get closer to 255. I'm going to hit cancel on that. I think I've got an active selection going here, so I'm going to undo all of that. I canceled out of that levels. Hit Command D to make sure that you don't have an active selection going. And then we're going to do the same thing again. Bring up the levels dialog box. Yeah, I had an active selection going. And again, you can't tell that you have one going because there's no marching ants because we didn't reach the 50% threshold of pixels to show us marching ants. So now I'm going to drag that slider back and now get a much better result. And I'm going to get close to 255 on my point number 2. I'm going to stop at 253. I'm going to go to my arrow keys and tap that in until I just get to 255. It's now looking like this part's working. I'm going to actually check my hair edge again using the eyedropper tool, the preview tool on and off. And I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not being too aggressive, that I'm not losing all of those fine little hairs in there. I feel like this is actually pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. Then I'm going to double click on the hand to take a look at what's going on, and you can see I've got contamination in this hole, so the left side of her head. There's a lot of contamination in that, so I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to keep it as an overlay brush. I'm going to change it to about a 50% hardness. I can have something of a soft edge, but I still want to be able to control this. Be careful as you start to get towards this area where you're touching, where you're getting near backgrounds, but I can actually work through all of this and get all of this to be solid black. All of that contamination that's in there. Exactly, gets rid of all of that. I'm going to go on the other side. Things are looking pretty good over there. All of this part is actually working out pretty well. So I'm feeling good about this. The edge of her face that's on this side right here, I would probably go in and use the pen tool to clean this up. But this is my second method, and I don't know that it's going to be the last one or the perfect one that I'm going to use. So I'm not going to continue to work on this one until I actually see what my zero selective color will give me. So I'm going to go up to the very top again. I'm going to click on the RGB channel up at the very top again. We're going to start the whole process over one more time. Then finally, I'm going to go to my actions palette. Does everyone in here still have a zero selective color action? Okay, so I'm going to find it, and then I'm going to run it. So I'm going to click on zero selective color, click on the little at the very bottom of your actions palette, the arrow that's pointing towards the right. I'm going to click on that. In my case, this does give me a completely black image, which is what I was looking for. If you got something that looked like a solarized image, it's the radio buttons at the very bottom of the properties panel. Make sure it's on absolute. In the drop-down menu for colors, I'm actually going to pick the greens, and I'm going to grab the black slider for my black ink and drag it all the way to the left-hand side, and that'll actually open up my image a little bit. I can also then boost the saturation of the green to have this have greater impact. To do that, select the hue saturation layer that's underneath the selective color layer in your palette. This will give us a hue saturation adjustment layer. Click on the hand that's at the very top in the properties panel, the hand that's got a little arrow that points both right and left. That's the targeting adjustment tool. And then simply come down onto the targeting adjustment tool and click and start to drag to the right. It saturates your color more, so that then, because the color is more saturated, then the selective color that's on top has a greater impact on this. And again, it starts to actually open this up. So in this case, we don't have an active selection going like we did earlier, but I can simply come down into my red, green, and blues. This is a black and white image, so your red channel, green channel, and blue channel are all identical, because again, remember, equal amounts of RGB equal gray. So this is now a grayscale image due to what we did with the selective color. It's turned it into a grayscale image. So I can copy either the red, green, or blue channel. It doesn't matter which one I copy, they're identical. So I'm going to copy the blue channel just because it's near the bottom. I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to call this zero selective color. Zero selective knockout, and say OK to that. I still have my number 2 control point is in here. My number 1 control point right here is in the middle of her head. You can still see a little bit of her eyes. I'm going to go ahead and leave her the control point right where it is. I don't need to really move it. We'll see actually what's happening. But take a look at your RGB readouts. You can see that they don't resemble anything to what we had before. These RGB readouts, I'm getting like a 217, a 194 for my point number 1. That can't possibly be true until you look over at your layers palette and realize that the adjustment layer is the layer that's selected, not the image layer. If you click on the image layer, it will now be selected, and now these color points actually have meaning to them. So again, working on my zero selective color knockout, I can throw away your hue saturation and the selective color layer both. They've both done their job. We don't need them anymore. Make sure that you are selecting the zero selective color channel at the very bottom of your channels palette. Again, I've still got my point number 1 is reading zeros. That's the stuff that's right in the middle of her head. And then my point number 2 over here is actually reading a larger value. Now you can see how much contamination I've got in this background right here. It's like littered with junk. Tonal junk is what I would call it. In order to bring that into the fold, because I'm going to run levels again, but in order to sort of like account for all of that, I'm going to boost my sample size. So I'm going to select the color sampler tool, again the eyedropper, and I'm going to change my sample size from this 3x3 to a 5x5 and see if anything in my palette actually changes here. It hasn't changed anything in here, so I'm going to go ahead and run levels from this point. Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. Again, the area other than the highlights that are on her eyes that's already zeroed out. So I'm going to leave that where it is. I'm going to grab the highlight slider, again, the little white triangle on the right side of the histogram underneath the bottom. Start to drag it back until I'm just looking at my number 2 readout. It's exactly what we've done for all the other images as well. And I'm going to get close to that 255, stop, go to my arrow keys, and tap that in until I just get to 255. And then again, before you say okay to that, check out the edge of the hair that's sitting up here on the side. Use your preview check mark to turn this on and off. Take a look to see that part looks like, it looks like everything in here is getting pretty cleaned out. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. Hit the B key immediately to get a brush. Change the blending mode of the brush back to normal. And then you need to paint around her eyes. You can see the highlights, the catch lights that are in her eyes. There's still that contamination that's on the the left side of her head. I'm going to go back to an overlay brush so that I can protect those edges. I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger. I need to check to make sure. Yeah, about a 50% hardness in there would be good. It gives me some control without worrying about overspray. And then again, I'm going to stay away from all of the background that I can stay away from and just finish cleaning out the rest of her hair on that side. The other side is looking pretty good to me. Where things get a little wonky here is really more now around her face. So I'm going to start on the right hand side. I'm going to zoom in to just below her ear. There's some little bits of hair that are coming out her ear. I'm not going to hit the stuff that's up here by the side of her ear that's really obvious hair that's in the background, but it looks like garbage here at the very back here. So I'm just going to get rid of that. Black is currently my foreground color, so I'm going to hit the X key to make white my foreground color, and then I'm simply going to paint across those areas to get rid of those little baby hairs. It's also sharpening up the edge of her face on that side, so I like what it's done on that side. On the other side, I've got a small bit of her collar at the very bottom. I want to make sure I get the collar first. So I am going to do that same trick and get rid of that skanky background stuff, whatever's going on in the background underneath her ear. I want to use that same white trick here, but if I do it before I make the collar of her shirt black, then it's also going to make her collar of her shirt too light. So I'm going to go after the collar of her shirt first. I'm going to make my brush considerably smaller. I'm going to hit the F key now to go to the paste board so that I got a little bit of room to work with. Then again, hit the B key to get a brush. Make sure it is an overlay brush. Mine is. I'm going to actually make this an even harder brush, so I'm going to zip this up at around 75-80%, something like that, just to make sure I've got more control. And then I want to just be, very careful and paint across that collar part of her shirt. So X key to make black my foreground color and simply paint across that line right here. You can see it didn't quite get the entire collar of her shirt, so I'm going to hit it a second time. That's now done. Now I can hit the X key to go to a white background color, make my brush a little bit larger, and then paint away all of this other skanky stuff that's in that background. I'm going to bring it up along the side of her face. I don't want to get rid of all those small little hairs that are by her ear, but I do want to get rid of all the sort of like garbage stuff that's out there. Now finally, at this stage of the game, I can take a look and you can see that the edge on this side of her face is actually pretty trashed here. I mean, again, this is not, part of this is due to it being out of focus. I mean, that's basically what's going on in here. So I want to clean all of this up, so I'm going to go to the pen tool to do that. So I'm going to zip back out here. I'm going to hit the P key to get the pen tool, and then I'm going to zip in a little bit closer here, and I'm just going to start to do my pen work here. You guys know how to do this already. And again, this is exactly what we were talking about before. If you need to make a mistake, you need to cut off more of her face as opposed to leaving background. So I'm going to continue to work this down. And then I'm just simply going to, oops, sorry, I'm not going to do that. And then I'm just going to jump out here and go back up to the original point right here. I'm going to then go to my path palette, double click on the word work path, and I'm going to call this left neck. And say OK to that. Command click on the thumbnail to load this as a selection. And then we need to soften this selection before we apply it. So up to the select menu, down to modify, down to feather. And I'm going to put in a 2 pixel feather here. This edge I think needs to be pretty soft. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Then back to my layers palette, back to my channel, make sure that we are still working on this zero selective color knockout. And again, I want to hide this. I don't want this to be showing in here. So I'm going to fill this with white. White is my foreground color. So again, Option Delete, Command D to deselect. And that's... So do you have the path selection made yet? You could, but this is still the same thing. Are you talking about going up to doing it on the RGB guy here? Well, it's the same thing. How do we do what? Oh, just click on the RGB channel at the very top. Okay. I call it left neck. Command click on the thumbnail of the path to load it as a selection. Then up to the select menu, down to modify, down to feather. Because again, we need to soften that selection. If you just use the pen tool, it's too sharp. So, and then I put in a 2 pixel feather on mine. And then you need to fill that with white. Again, I'm working on this area right here. I want this all hidden, so I need to fill this with white. White is my foreground color, Option Delete, Command D to deselect. So this is where I would actually start with the image, and we'll see how well this works for us right now. So come back to your layers panel, make a copy of your background layer. So Command J will actually make a copy of it. I'm going to then come over and load my zero selective color channel as a mask. So hover over the thumbnail of it, hold down the the Command key, click to load this as a selection, and then come back over to your layer number 1, the copy that we just made, and add it as a layer mask. Now you don't see any change because again, the background that's underneath it is identical. If you turn off the background, you can actually see that the mask is doing the exact opposite of what I wanted it to do. So what I wanted to do is to hide the background and actually show the figure. But look at this, right off the bat. I can see I've got some problems sitting up here at the very top. If we take a look up here at the very top, you can see that there's an area of transparency that's up here. This is telling me that my mask is not complete. So I'm going to throw this mask away. I'm going to go back and fix it, and I'm going to not apply it. I'm going to delete it. I'm going to go back and look at my zero selective color mask, and I'm going to hover in this area over up in here, and you can see I'm reading in the 242s in my info palette up here. That just tells me that there's contamination up here that I need to get rid of. But there's also hair that's up in here that I want to keep. So I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make this a completely soft brush right now. It is going to be an overlay brush, 100% opacity, 100% flow. And then what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to get close to the area. There's this one big strand of hair right here. If I lose the whole big strand of hair, it's not going to be the end of the world. But I don't want to lose all this hair that's down in this area right here. So I'm going to get my big brush close to this. I'm going to, white is my foreground color. I'm going to click and drag back to the corner, and click and drag back, and click and drag back. I'm sort of like it's a compromise here. I'm losing some of those fine hairs, but I'm also cleaning up the whole corner edge of that background, which I need to actually have for where we're going to go from this point on. I'm going to come down here into the area that's underneath the hair that's right by her ear on the right hand side to see if I get a little tone there. I've gotten a little bit here. You can see I'm getting a little bit of a positive readout, so I'm going to zip through that using that very same brush. And down here on the lower part, I've got some garbage that's sitting down around the bottom I want to get rid of. I'm going to go take a look at the other side really quickly just to make sure all of that we actually cleaned out before, so that part's going to be fine. So now I'm going to load my zero selective color mask again, hover over the thumbnail of the channel, not the channel itself, but the thumbnail, hold down the command key and click to load it as a selection. Back over to layer number 1 and actually add this as a layer mask. And then again, the mask is actually doing the exact opposite of what I want to do. It's hiding the figure, showing the background. I want it to do the opposite. So invert this. Command I inverts the mask. Now, in this case, it's on a transparent background. That's why you're seeing the checkerboard. If you select the background layer that's underneath it, and then come and add an adjustment layer. So I'm going to add an adjustment layer between the two figures. Yes? It's probably because you have the eyeball on the background still turned on. So I need to put a blank white layer in between the two of these. So I've selected the bottom layer. I'm going to click on Add an Adjustment Layer and come up and say Add Solid Color. Once solid color opens up, you can simply type in white, which would be, again, I'm just selected the RGB values of this. So I've selected the R value, 255, tab key to go to the green, 255, tab key to go to the blue, 255, that's a pure white, and I'll go ahead and say okay to that. And then simply take a look around my image and see how well I did. And you can see that in many cases, this is a far superior way of doing it. I do have a little bit of edge that's running down on the side of her face that I think I need to get rid of. On the other side, it's actually looking pretty good. And I've also got spill going on in here as well. So I'm going to fix the edge that's running along this side first. So again, I'm talking about the edge of the right side of her face. There's a real strong contrast line there that I need to actually get rid of. So I'm going to select my layer mask. Again, the layer mask that's actually providing this knockout. I'm going to go to my history palette. At the bottom of my history palette, I'm going to click on the thing that looks like a little camera. It'll open up a new snapshot dialog box. If you did not get this new snapshot dialog box, it means you have not set up your options correctly. So I'm going to hit cancel out of here. If you click on the little hamburger menu to the right of the tab that says history, click on this drop-down menu to come down to history options, and then make sure that you have automatically create first snapshot. That is on by default, but what's not on is this automatically create new snapshot when saving, and also show new snapshot dialog by default. Make sure that those three things are selected. Say okay, and then click on that little camera again and call this pre-choke. And say okay to that. Then we're going to go to the mask itself. We need to choke this mask. So I'm going to zoom into this area that's just showing, again, the bottom part of her right ear and the edge of her face. I'm going to blur this image first. So again, make sure that you've got the mask selected, because we're doing all of this work on the mask. You choke the mask, not the image, the mask. So make sure the mask is selected. I can tell mine is because it's got the little white brackets around it. I'm going to come up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur, and I'm going to see what a 3 looks like here. I don't think a 3 is let's try a 3. If the 3 doesn't work, we'll just undo it all and go back to a 4. So I'm going to do 3 pixel radius on the blur for here. You can see it makes my problem worse. Then I'm going to go Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. And again, what I'm doing now is I'm changing. So when I did the blur, it created a series of grays that went between the black part of the mask that's hiding the background and the white part of the mask that's showing the face. So this created grays in between. Now I'm going to use this levels dialog box to reset the grays to either be black or white, and that's what controls my choke or my spread. So I never remember which one it is. I'm just going to grab the black slider on the bottom and start to drag the black. So again, the black point slider underneath the histogram in the levels dialog box, start to drag it towards the center and see what happens. And you can see that indeed it is actually choking this. It's pulling it in here, which is making it a little bit better. However, for me, I've got to get this thing almost all the way over to pure white in order to get the choke to work. That tells me that I didn't do enough of a blur on this. So I'm going to cancel out of this. I'm going to go back in history one step before my blur. So I had a new color fill layer and then the Gaussian blur. I'm going to go right back behind it. That undoes the blur. I'm going to select the layer mask again and then blur it more. So up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur, and I'm going to make it 4 pixels now instead of 3, and say OK. Then I'm going to do the same trick again. Command L to bring up the levels dialog box, grab the black point slider and start to drag across. Yeah, and I feel much better about that. It gets me a little bit closer there. However, I feel like this edge is a little bit too soft here, so we just need to bump the contrast on the edge a little bit. So grab your white point slider underneath the histogram. Again, the white point that's all the way to the right side. Click it and start to pull it towards the middle, and you'll see it'll start to sharpen up that whole edge. And I feel like this part's better. If you use your preview button, your preview checkbox to do it on and off before you actually say OK to this, I actually like the way that part looks better, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Then immediately, here's the key word, do another snapshot, another history snapshot. So at the bottom of your history palette, click on the little camera and call this post choke. And say OK. Then I'm going to double click on the hand to zip all the way back out and take a look. And you can see that the choke itself did a really good job on the side of her face, but look what it did to the hair. It destroyed the hair. So in your history palette, we need to go back in time before we did the choke. So in your history palette, if you look at the last 2 layer steps, this was the choke. One was the levels, one was the Gaussian blur. I'm going to go back to the new color fill step right before it. It brings back all of the problems that I had. It brings back all the spill, but at least it brings back all her hair. But now if I zoom in here and take a look at the edge that I wanted to choke, I can then go to the top of my history palette. You will see that there are 3 history states that are stamped at the very top. There's the first state that's just the name of the file. That's what it looked like when we opened it up. The second one is what the file looks like before we choke it, and the third one is what it looks like after we choke it. You do not want to pick any of these states. You simply want to click on the little box that's to the left of the state that you wish to paint with using your history brush. In my case, it's the post-choke one, so I'm going to click to put my history brush right there. Then grab your history brush. It's right underneath the clone stamp tool. Just make sure it is the history brush. Again, we're going to check the edge of this. 0% hardness is fine. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. And then again, make sure that you're working on the layer mask, because this is what we need to change in history. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. And then I'm simply going to click and paint down along that edge of her face, the right side of her face, to actually do the choke on that part of her face, all the way down to her neck as well. This part's now taken care of. I'm good to go here, and I'm good to go on the other side. So my last move in all of this is to fix the spill. So to fix the spill, click on the pixel content of this layer. Again, I can fuck this pixel content up all I want because I've got a virgin sitting down at the very bottom, so I don't need to be worrying about protecting this, so I can go after this pretty aggressively. I'm going to hit the B key to get a normal brush. I'm going to change the blending mode to color, and then normal 100% opacity, 100% flow on this. I'm going to check the edge of my brush. In this case, I'm going to make it a medium hardness. Again, it'll give me a little bit softer transition. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to start on the part that's right next to her ear. And since I'm doing this right next to her ear, I'm actually going to change the hardness of that brush all the way to 100% hard brush. Because again, I don't want to spray any new color into the flesh color of her ear. I'm going to come up to the top. I want to sample a color of brown, so something up that's more up near her forehead. To temporarily get the color picker tool, you hold down the Option key. Your brush will temporarily become a color picker. Click on a color of brown that's up at the top, and then come back down and just start to paint through the color that's all the spill that's sitting out here on the outside. Resample a lot of times, so I'm going to come up and sample a little bit darker color to go after some more of this. So you can see right now, I don't know if you can see this on your screen, but right now there is a color transition that's happening right here that is really obvious. I can completely spot that. That's because this is a completely hard brush. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to make my brush completely soft now, because again, I'm going from hair into hair color right here. I'm also going to pick a darker color instead of this like lighter brown color. So I'm going to hold down the Option key, a darker color that's nearby here, and then I'm simply going to go through those areas, sample another color that's got a little bit of brown in it. You can also go over color. So right now, if you feel like this color that I just painted right here in the background is too gray, it doesn't have enough color in it, resample another, set another sampler that's got more brown in it, and then just paint over this again. Every time you paint over this, it redoes it. Now in this case, I feel like it made it too brown, so I don't like that either. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, which gets rid of that. And in this case, you can actually change your flow down to, I'm going to change my flow down to like a 6, 7, 8%, somewhere in there. And in this case, you can start scrubbing over these areas to blend in a little bit of it. So it's not a complete replacement of it. So I'm going to just work on these areas here by scrubbing in. The longer you scrub in here, because you're using flow, the sooner it will actually get to that color. But then once I get up to the top part of her hair, again on the top right hand side, I don't need to keep that low flow again. I can go all the way back to 100%, hold down the Option key, resample another new color up in here, and just work to get rid of the rest of the spill that's actually happening up in here. Resample a darker color up in there to get a little bit better spill removal. There is some little small spill in the very, very top of her head on the background. And then you need to sample darker colors for the color that you're going to deal with on the other side, because the other side is actually in shadow. It's out of the light. So you want to make sure that you don't have any super light brown color back in the back, because that wouldn't make any sense. I'm going to go back by her ear right now on the left-hand side. You've got to go back to a completely hard brush because you're too close to the ear, so this way you don't actually end up killing. And again, I feel like there's too much red in that, so I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that and sample another color that's over here that doesn't have anywhere near that amount of red in it. Double click on the hand, and this is your knockout right here. I would save this file because this is the beginning of your homework. And then the last thing I want to do is actually show you your homework as long as we're here. So if you can go to our Session 7 folder, inside of Session 7, inside the assignment folder, you will see that there's another copy of that file that we just worked on, but you have just done the knockout part, which is the whole first part of the assignment, so just save that and you don't need to do that again. But if you click, there's a JPEG that's right underneath it that's called Retouch Notes. If you open this up, this will tell you what you need to do for your assignment. So in your assignment, if you take a look at this, you need to fill in the hairline. All the notes are written on here. You need to balance these skin tones. Look at the, there's a lot of red in this skin right here. There's a lot of green right here. You need to balance not only these, but all the skin tone colors. You need to clean up the little loose eyelashes that are in her eye, not eyelashes, her eyebrow lines, little hairlines in here. Clean all of that up. There are pimples that she has on her face. You need to clean all of those up. You need to remove the lines, the blood vein lines that are in her eyes. She is wearing contacts. For people here who shoot beauty, just word to the wise, don't ever let anybody get on your set that's wearing contacts, because you will see them. You've got to go in and remove the shadow lines of all of these contacts. You need to, again, even the skin out that's underneath her eyes right here. Smooth out the skin on the other side over there. Remove the stray eyelashes. You need to remove the hair that's on her upper lip. You need to clean up the inside of her nose. You need to fix the teeth. And what I mean by this is, you can see she has got her two front teeth crossed. You need to uncross them. She's also missing a tooth on the right-hand side that's further back in her mouth. You need to replace that missing tooth. You need to then remove what they call the smile lines that are on the side of her face. You need to remove the pores and the acne that's on her lower chin. Then you need to fix the lip. And when I say fix the lip, I'm just going to throw this out here. There's small little bits of dead skin on the top of her lip right here. Fixing her lip does not mean removing all of the lines. If you remove all of the lines that are in her mouth, she looks like, you know those wax lips that you used to be able to get at Halloween? You don't want her to look like she's wearing those. So don't remove all of that shit. It's just to fix up more of the small little dead skinny kind of parts on there. Are there questions about this?
So can you do a demonstration to us on how to fix the teeth?
That's the challenge.
Yeah.
Any way you want. Okay. To get us off of this, again, we're still on the pasteboard right now, so I don't have the little stoplight thing to actually close and get out of this thing. So hit the F key a second time. It'll take you to the black pasteboard. F key one more time. You'll get back to the little stoplights. You can close this up again. Save this image. You've now done the whole first part of that, because the first part of this assignment was to knock this girl out, put her on a white background, and then remove the spill. Okay, last thing I'm going to tell you about this right now. I'm going to be kind to you. I've never done this for a retouching class. You're the first. So here's the thing I'm going to tell you right now. We've got a knockout going on here. If you turn off the solid color layer, you can see she's on a transparent background. If you use this thing right here to start your split frequency work, which is where we're going to go next, the problem that you will run into is that you've got a mask already on this split frequency work. And when we do the low frequency part, this is going to get fucked up. So to do this work, just the word right here, just do this with me right now. Select the top layer. You're going to have to remember this keyboard shortcut as well, because you're going to use it for the rest of your life. So the keyboard shortcut is this. The command key or the control key if you're on Windows, the option key, the shift key, and the letter E. If you do all of those at once, it will do a merge stamp version of every layer that you have that's visible. We only had two layers that was visible. We had the solid color fill, and we had the background layer that has the spill removed on it. Double click on this thing, on the thing that's been merged, and actually type in NV. What does that stand for? New version. This is now the beginning of your photograph. Sure. So do you have your knockout done already? Select the top layer, hold down the command key, the option key, the shift key, and hit the letter E. So did it then make a copy of merge all and then double click on it and call it NV. This is now the beginning of your image. Do not throw away the shit that's underneath it, because if you need it, you need it. But this is the beginning of where you would start. So again, your next move would be to do whatever pixel layer that you need to do pixel retouching, like we did for the cigarette burn for the girl. Then we're going to go into split frequency work. That's what we're going to talk about for the whole rest of today. If you save it where? Do you have a hard drive plugged in? Then I don't know what folder it's saving it to, but that's not going to save it anywhere unless you save it to something that you have. Do you have a hard drive here or a thumb drive? Save it to that, plug that in and save it to that. Okay. I am going to save this for no reason. Other than the minute I close it up, I'm probably going to have to open it right up again. All right, you can close that guy up. All right, so how many people in this room have ever done any split frequency work? Hold your hand up higher. Okay, so for those of you who've done it, can you explain to me how it works? What are you doing? Yeah, that would just be the safe answer for us. Just go with that. Yeah, I'm not really sure. Okay, so this is basically how, or what we're going to actually try to do with this. So I'm going to explain it to you first, and then we're going to go and actually look at images, and then we're actually going to do the work. So if you think about when we're talking about split frequency here, what we're talking about is spatial frequency. Now, most of you people are very familiar with frequency when people talk about sound. So, oh, that's a high frequency. Oh, it's a really high-pitched sound, or it's a really low frequency. Oh, that's a bass sound. That's kind of stuff right here. The same thing happens in imagery, but in imagery, when we talk about, what we're talking about here is spatial frequency. And what that really means is, if you were to plot out the changes that happen in an image as you went along a certain area of an image, if you got a whole lot of variation in your image, if you're looking at the info readout, then you're seeing it jump up all over the place. It's going way up, it's way down, and it's happening all really fast. That would be high spatial frequency. If, on the other hand, you're dragging across an area of an image that's extremely low in frequency, whatever, you won't see much change at all. You'll see a little bump and a variation, but not a whole lot. To see it, actually, you're not going to see this on the recording, but you will see it on our whiteboard here. When we look at what we really are talking about in terms of spatial frequencies, I think it could be made a little bit more sense. But if we have a graph line right here, and we're just going to talk about frequencies of waves that are on here. If you have a high frequency wave, it looks like this. You get a lot of variation very quickly. So it would be like this. This would be a wave that was considered to be high frequency. A lot of rapid changes very quickly. Low frequency would be like this. Very little change over a whole long period of time. So these areas of frequency, spatial frequency, correspond to two different elements in our image. The first one, high frequency, is all about texture and detail. Low frequency is all about color, tone, and volume. So let's open up an image and see if we can't figure out exactly what we're really talking about here. So in your session 7, there is a folder called Split Frequency Retouching. Inside of here, I want to point out a couple of things just so that you guys know what's really going on, and then we'll actually look at this stuff and work on them. The first is this ultimate guide to frequency separation technique. If you read that, it will not only describe what's really going on again, but it will also give you the recipes that you need to do the split work, and you'll see what that means in just a minute. If you do enough of this, eventually you'll memorize these recipes, but for the beginning of all of this, you probably are going to need to refer to something. This is the place to go to get the recipes to do the split work. In most cases, if you see any of the YouTube videos on any of this, or you've gone through any previous workshops for any of this stuff, to do split frequency work, most of the time it's not set up to do it non-destructively. I reject that. You know this by me, you should know this about me by now, is that I don't do anything in this class, nothing in my retouching, nothing that I can't go backwards. everything. I've always got a back door. I've always got a side window. I've always got some way that I can get out of this. So there is a way to actually do this work non-destructively. You won't see it anywhere. This is just something that I've made up. But again, there's another PDF that describes the process once you get your split frequency done, how to then, what you need to add to it to make it non-destructive. That's what this other one is about. We are going to do a second version of split frequency work. It's actually a high pass frequency separation technique. That's what this third PDF is all about. And then finally, we actually do quite a bit of work using the mixer brush in split frequency work. However, you need your mixer brush set up to a very specific way, and I'll explain exactly what that is and why we set it up the way we set it up, and then we'll go from there. And then finally, there's a folder in there that's got split frequency images in it. And so I'm going to go after the split frequency images in here. And the first one that I want to do is, if you take a look in here, there is a file called split frequency retouching image.psd. If you could double click on that one and open that guy up for me. You can double click on the hand. So, did anybody not find this image? Girl on green? Okay. So, when I was talking about split frequencies, I need everybody to zoom in really quickly to this girl's mouth. So when we come in really tight into this area of this girl's mouth, you can actually see on the left side of her lip, there's a bunch of fine little hairs. You can see a bunch of pores in there, all of it. All of that is considered detail and texture. That makes it high frequency. It's a high spatial frequency. Again, if you were to zoom way in and take a look at this, you can see you go from dark parts of skin to light parts of hair to dark parts of skin again, whatever. Things are changing very rapidly in here. That's why we actually have detail in here. But if you then click on your space bar to get the hand and go over to the other side, and we take a look at her cheek on the other side, she too has a cigarette burn, so I'm looking at the area that's underneath it. But you can see the area that's underneath here. You can spot a few pores. You don't spot any hairs. Basically, the only thing that's happening here is I've got a little bit of tone and color in her skin. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of variation going on in here. This is low frequency work. Does this make sense, the difference in the two? Okay, I want you to go back over to the area where you can see the little the hairs and the pores on her face, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to zip back out just a little bit more too, because not that much. Because I also want to be able to see, if I can, I want to be able to see her eye as well. So I think I'll be able to do that, yeah. So I'm on my screen at 200% here. This gives me exactly sort of where I want to be. So here is how you do split frequency work. Your first thing is to make 2 copies of your background layer. So my background layer is active, Command J, it makes 2 copies of it. Double click on the one that's in the middle, the very first one that we made. It's called layer number 1, and you're going to rename this low. And I got to be honest with you guys, naming these things is really critical, because where we ultimately get in to do the split work can get very confusing, and if you don't have your layers named correctly, you're just fucked. So don't do that. So you can make this in action, but let's get through it and see what we're doing first, one step at a time. Then come up to the one that's on the top, double click on that one and rename it high. So again, when we're talking about this spatial frequency, I am going to make the bottom layer, or the layer that's in the middle, the one we named as low, it's going to only have the low frequencies in it. And then the one that's on the top is only going to have the high frequencies in it. And you'll see the advantage of why we're doing this, hopefully really soon. So everybody got low and high done? Okay, turn the eyeball for high off. Select low. We're going to start with the low layer here first, and we need to create the low frequencies in here. Now they're in here. The thing is, both of them are in here. We have the low frequencies, so we have all the tone and color, but we've also got all the high frequency in here as well, which is all the detail. we are going to blur this to eliminate the high frequency. And when we do that, the only thing that will be left is the low frequency. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, so to do this, it's a Gaussian blur. So up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. And I'm going to start off with a blur radius of 1. And right now what I'm looking for is, can I still see this fine little hairs? Yes, I can. Can I still see discrete eyelashes? Yes, I can. Can I still see pores in her skin? Yes, I can. It's not strong enough. So then I'm going to change this to 2. That's better, but I can still see some of those fine little hairs, and I can still see some of the pores. So I'm going to go to a blur of 3. I can still barely see some of those fine little details in there. Not too much. 3 is awfully close to me. I'm going to see what 4 looks like. And at 4, it's obliterated all of that. I don't have any of those anymore. So now you look at her eye and you'll say, well, Verser, I can still see the eyelashes, but what you really can see there's no detail in this eyelash. It is just a form of tone that's up there. The detail in this is actually gone. If you don't believe me, use the little check marks at the preview part and turn it off, and you can see all of that detail, all of the pores in the skin, all the hairs in the skin, all of that kind of stuff has been obliterated by this blur. Again, her iris, her pupil of her eye, the whites of her eye, whatever, that is not detail. That is all tone and color. So I'm going to say okay to this. So I did a blur of 4 pixels. I'm going to say okay to that.
Well,
yes?
so I still don't quite get it. Like, how do we know, like, how blurry we need to be?
You guess. You're looking to get rid of the detail.
How to define detail?
Again, it's a slippery slope. Because, but that's the crux of all of this, is that the minute you end low frequency, you are into high frequency, and at what point does that actually happen? There's no guide here. There's no definitive rule here. You need to decide what it is you want to actually keep in the high frequency to retouch, and what is it you want to keep in the low. That's why I'm going to show you to do high frequency, because it's the exact opposite process of this. In that one, you get to pick the high frequency. So just stick with us for a little while and see where you get. It's not going to be the end of the world one way or the other. All right, so has everybody got this blurry low image? All right, click on the high layer now and actually turn its eyeball on. So we've turned the eyeball on, and you need to pick it. You need to make sure that the high layer is picked. So what we've got now is, this is our original image. This has now got both the high frequency and the low frequency in it both. The layer underneath it only has the low in it. We got rid of all the high stuff when we did that blurring. So now the trick to getting the high frequency is that we are going to subtract all of the information in the low layer from this layer. And what we will be left with is the high frequency. Make sense? That's the goal. All right, so to do that, make sure you're on the high layer, make sure that the eyeball is turned on, come up to the image menu, down to apply image. Now, apply image is a control that happened in the very early stages of Photoshop. People weren't doing split frequency work like this because there were no layers in the beginning of Photoshop. This was actually ways to control, to do blending modes for all the channels. So you could do shit with your channels using apply image. However, once layers came about and the ability to do this work came in, this is where we are right now. So your introduction to apply image is going to be split frequency work, but it applies to a gazillion other things in Photoshop as well. But this is where we're going to start. So in the apply image dialog box, if you look up at the source at the beginning, there's a drop down menu, and this will actually show you any image that you have open. You can actually do apply images between multiple images. There's no reason for us to do that right now, but you can do that. That's why you get that drop down menu. You don't need to change it because we've only got one image open. The layer that's right underneath that, you need to click on that drop down menu and come down and pick low, because again, we are going to subtract the low layer from this current layer that has everything on it, and what will remain will be the high frequencies. So then you can leave the RGB channel part. In the next part down under blending mode, you'll see that target and it's going to say split frequency, and if you actually were to hover over this long enough, it would tell you that we are going to do this apply image to the high layer. And the reason it's already targeted is because we selected this. The only way you can select a target in apply image is to pick it before you come into apply image. But because we've got this thing already selected, that is now the target, which is what we want. Then in the blending mode, you click on the drop-down menu and you come all the way down to subtract. Again, we are going to subtract the low layer from the total layer here that was high, and what will remain will only be the high. And then finally, you need to leave the opacity at 100%. You need to set a scale of 2 and an offset of 128. Now the reason that we're doing this is if we zero out the 128, you'll actually see that your image is largely dark. This 2 is an averaging, so what we're doing is that we're using the 2 to actually get value in here, but then we're using an offset of 128 to fill everything in here with a middle gray. That's what this 128 is all about. And you can see that I've got a large part of my image is just middle gray, but then I've got all of the detail that's in this image. I have no color in this image, I've got no real tone in this image, but I do have all the detail that is in the image. Yes. Click on this drop-down menu in the blending mode and come all the way down to subtract.
I'm just getting tired and kind of like getting retarded. So where do you find
image menu, down to apply image. In the drop-down menu for a layer, pick low. In the drop-down for the blending mode, subtract. 100% opacity, a scale of 2, and an offset of 128. And say OK. So really quickly, just to show you guys, in the split frequency folder, the ultimate guide to split frequency technique, if you take a look in here, this is where that recipe is right here. You can see there's 2 versions of it. This is for an 8-bit image. You do a different version of that same sort of thing if you're working in 16-bit for different reasons. But most people do all of this work in 8-bit image, so this is the recipe for 8-bit image. If you are working in 16-bit, just realize that there's a different recipe for 16-bit. Just open up this thing and you'll find those recipes and you'll be good to go. So then finally, with this thing set to high frequency, you need to change the blending mode on the high frequency layer from normal down to linear light. So it's in the sort of overlay group. Click on this and it will come down to linear light. Then finally, hold down your shift key and click on the low frequency. So now I've selected both high and low layers. They're both highlighted. Come up to the little pancake little menu items to the right of the layers palette. Click on this drop down and come out and say new group from layers, and then title this group FS. It stands for frequency separation, and say OK. You now should have a regular version of your image, the version that's sitting down at the bottom, and then you should have this frequency separation group up at the top. Yes? Yes. So you want to then turn this eyeball on and off for your frequency layer group. If you see any change in your image at all, you fucked it up. You need to redo it. If it doesn't seem like anything is changing, you've done this correctly. Are we good on this part? Okay. Open up your frequency layer group. We now need to do the protective parts. So this is the part about how to do frequency separation work non-destructively. So I've created my frequency separation group. I'm going to open this up. Click on the low layer to start with and just hit Command J. All we're doing is making a copy of the low layer, and that's all you have to do. So all of our work is going to be on the copy. If we fuck something up, we've got the original copy underneath it that we can then either go and grab material from with and bring it up into our image. We can actually clone from it. We can go back in time is basically what we can do. Make sense? So did you put both those layers into a frequency layer group? A frequency separation group? So we're going to go to high now, and we're going to click on Command J again for high, but we're going to run into a problem when we do that. So when we do this, we are going to click on high, hit Command J. You'll see that your image gets much more crunchy, much more contrasty. And the reason this is much more crunchy and contrasty is because we're actually doubling up this linear light blending mode on this. To fix this, change the linear light blending mode of your top layer. You want to keep the bottom one where it is on linear light, but the top one, take it back to normal. But now we don't get the impact from it. Now we just see it as the grayscale image basically that it is. So we need to now clip this top layer to the one that's underneath it. To do that, hover over the space right where high copy touches high, where those two layers are touching one another. Put your cursor right over that, hold down the Option key, and you'll get a little box with an arrow that points counterclockwise, and click. And you will notice that high copy now shifts over to the right, and there's that same little weird arrow, that clockwise arrow that's going down. What that's telling us is that we have now clipped this high copy to the layer that's underneath it. That means that it not only will impact that anything that happens on the layer underneath it will affect this, but it inherits the blending mode. So even though this is set to a blending mode of normal, it's actually got a blending mode of linear light because being clipped, it inherited this from the bottom. This is how we work non-destructively. So we only work in the copy layers, and I'll show you if we run into a problem how we ultimately fix it. Now would be a good time for tablet. Hover your cursor between the two copies, between the high and the high copy. Hold down your Option key, and you will get, your cursor will change to a little square with a downward point, counterclockwise arrow. Do you have that? And then simply click once. If you need to unclip it, you do the exact same move again, and it will unclip it. But in this case, we don't want to unclip it. Everybody ready? Okay, I want to start here with the hairs that are on her lower lip. So I'm going to zoom in to the right side of her mouth and have all those little hairs on it. And this is what I want to actually show you. Yes? Did you change the blending mode of the high copy back to normal? Okay. If you hold down your Option key and you simply click on the eyeball of high copy, You will then just get the grayscale and you will see all the fine little hairs here. This is a lot of times how I work. I will work on these layers. If you can work on them and see the entire impact of this happening in totality, but sometimes it's easier to see, again, sources and destinations about where you want to actually do this work. But right now you can see that the only thing that we really see on here is that detail. We have no color in here, we got no real tone in here. We just have those little fine hair details. So this would be one way to work with this. I'm gonna hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball again. It'll turn everybody else back on. Just make sure that high copy is selected and we can actually do this work on high copy. So this goes back to our retouching tools and the conversation that we had last week. What I'm now doing is detail work only. So out of the two retouching tools that we have, the basic ones, we've got Clone Stamp tool and we've got Healing Brush tool. So with the Clone Stamp tool, we actually can replace detail for detail. For the Healing Brush tool, we replace texture, but then that texture gets blended in with the tone and color that's around it. That's not what's happening here. Tone and color happen in the low layer. So you do Healing Brush work in the low layer. In the high layer, you do Clone Stamp tool work. Because again, we want a direct replacement. So I'm gonna hit the S key to get the Clone Stamp tool, and it's important how you set this tool up. So I'm gonna click on the drop-down menu in my options panel for the Clone Stamp tool. If you can't remember the S key, just pick the Clone Stamp tool. It's the thing that looks like the clone, like a stamp. Click on this drop-down menu at the top. You want a hardness here of somewhere in the 80s. I typically will do mine around 85, something like that. You want a really hard brush. You don't want it perfectly hard because then you'll actually see the edges that you're changing, but you want a pretty hard brush in this to do this. In your blending mode, you're going to keep that as normal. You would never change opacity and flow for this work because changing opacity and flow blends old texture with new texture, which in my book is just fucked up texture. So you do not want to do that. You're going to leave this 100% flow, 100% opacity. And then I'm going to come over here and what we want to do is we want to sample an area of skin, of texture, of detail, the pores, all of that. We want to sample that and cover the hair with it. So I'm going to start on the left-hand side of this, hold down the Option key to set my source point, and I'm simply going to come over and start to paint the hair part out. I'm going to resample again, and again, all you care about in resampling, where we're looking for here, the things that you need to keep in mind. Number one, I want to sample the source point to have the texture that I want to be in my destination. So I'm not going to pick something up in the inside of her nose because there's no texture there and then paint it down on here where there's supposed to be skin pores and all that stuff. You want to pick where the pores are. The other thing that you need to keep in mind, the thing that will fuck you up every single time is that depending on where you pick your source point on the image, it can have a different focus than your destination. So if you look at the side of this girl's face, you can see over here by her ear, things are much, much more out of focus over here than they are on the front part of her face. You would not want to pick a part of her skin as a source point that is out of focus relative to the destination that you're trying to fix. Does that make sense, everyone? All right, so working my way back over here on the small parts of her hair. Again, I keep one hand on my Option key to resample because you want to resample a lot. And then I'm simply going to paint my way through all of these little hairs that are on the side. You can sample up from higher and below, but we're going to paint all this out. What I want everybody to notice is as you're painting, look at this mark that's right above her lip right here. It's a dark mark right here. As I start to work my way over this, I can change the pores in that, but that dark stain on her lip does not change. And that is because it is low frequency. It is not high frequency. Again, if you hold down your Option key and click on the eyeball, that spot is not in here anywhere. So again, this is the advantage of doing this. So now we need to think about one other thing, and this is the problem that people run into not doing split frequency work, but simply using the retouching tools on copies of their background, is that if you take a look, I'm going to zip back out. If we take a look at this, at the girl's face right here, this side of her mouth is in shadow, and that shadow is also giving her mouth dimension. She's got teeth underneath that part of her lip, under that part of her mouth. As we start to move down here, you can see this area down in here is more in shadow than this area that's up here in the top, because because the shape of her mouth is shadowing this, or throwing this into shadow from our main light. That's all low frequency work. You don't need to worry about matching this. We are just matching the detail in this. So that tone is always going to remain there. The shadow will remain there because it's not high frequency. So then we're going to continue doing this work, running down along. Again, I can keep my cursor way up here in the top. I don't need to worry about the tone part of it all, because this is simply going to get rid of all of that. The little, well, you'll see in just a second. So this is basically how I get rid of this. And you can now see, if you turn on your frequency separation eyeball for the entire group, all this has done is remove the hair. We haven't changed the detail. We've changed the detail, but we haven't changed the tone or the color one iota. Make sense? All right, I want to go over to the cigarette burn that's on the other side of her face. We're going to do the other trick over here as well. However, you need to figure out where you're going to sample from over here. So if you look right underneath this, sort of like whatever this is on her face, if you look right underneath it, that skin is hitting the light completely flat. There is no tone. You don't see any pores in this. You don't see anything in this. It is strictly blank. The area, though, that we're trying to fix has tone in it. You can see the pores that are in it. So you don't want to sample from the area that's below. You want to sample from the area that's above, so that you maintain the pores that are in her face. So again, I'm going to hold down my Option key. I'm going to click up here on the top, and I'm going to change just the detail in here. But you can see there's still a stain on her face. That's because that tone part is in the low layer. So Patrick, this goes to what you were saying here. So if you get it perfect, you only need to change either the high layer or the low layer. If you don't, you have to go in and change it in both. So that's what we're going to do. So to fix this part now, the part that's remaining, you want to come down to your low copy. If you hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball, you will still see the stain is right here. We are going to get rid of this stain again using any of the healing brush tools. So with the healing brush tool, not the clone stamp tool, but the healing brush tool, you want to click on the little band-aid, come down to the healing brush tool, not the spot healing, but the healing brush tool. We're going to again come over here to the image. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. In this case, you want to keep the brush soft. So again, I'm going to keep it all the way down, 0% hardness, because we want to blend tone and color. We're not looking for those real distinctive lines. So I'm going to come up to the part, again, just above it, same area where I grabbed for the detail. Hold down the Option key, click to sample this, and then paint over that area of tone. And then turn your high layer, or hold down your Option key and click everybody else back on. You could have done that work with everybody showing. It's just a lot of times easier to see it without that. Turn your frequency separation on and off, and you can see this is a beautiful way of keeping the true real texture in her skin, but getting rid of the texture that we don't want, and then also smoothing the tone of her skin out. I'm going to zip back out again, and we are going to take a look at the area that's right underneath her eye. So you can see the area that's underneath her eye. There's a lot of bumpy pores that are under there, but there's also sort of like, again, she's got like, the darker areas that are underneath the eyes. How many of you guys actually have to go after darker areas that are underneath eyes and you try to lift them and it just fucks your image up? It starts to suck in. If you use the healing brush tool, it starts to pull in a tone from the eyelashes down into the skin. I mean, it's just a mess, right? So it becomes really difficult to do. In frequency separation, this will be relatively simple. I'm going to do this actually only looking at the split layers themselves. So I'm going to hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball for the high copy to do the tone, the detail work first. So I want to smooth this part out, but again, I need to pick an area in here that has the same focus. If we look at the area that's on the side of her nose, it does not have the same focus as this area. It's also being lit, so it's like totally blown out. I don't have any detail there at all. If I go to the other side, the area that's now between the area I'm trying to fix in her hair, I also get into this really super smooth area of hair. But if I look right underneath this part down here on the lower part of her skin, I still have texture, but it's nowhere near as obvious. It's nowhere near as strong and crunchy, whatever, is the area that's right underneath her eye. So I'm going to do this again. Back to the clone stamp tool, the S key. Hold down the option key to set, again, make sure that high copy is not only the visible part, but is also the selected part. So I'm working on my high copy layer. It's the only thing I can see. I'm going to sample an area that's down here below this area that I'm trying to fix using my clone stamp tool. I'm going to make the tool a little bit larger, and then I'm simply going to brush through this to fix that part. I'm also going to use it to get rid of the wrinkles that are right underneath her eyes. And as I start to move my way out, I'm going into area that doesn't have any texture in it. So I'm going to resample, holding down the option key. I'm going to resample area that's down here that's got texture in it, and then fix the rest of the area that's underneath her eye. Then if I hold down my option key and click to turn everybody else back on and do my frequency separation on and off, you can see I have smoothed this area out detail wise. However, I've kept all of the, I've kept detail in it. I've just actually smoothed that whole skin part out. Does that make sense to everybody what's going on? However, I've still got that sort of, the dark area underneath her eye is still there because that's low frequency work. So if you come down, hold down your option key and click on your low frequency part, you can actually see the staining that's actually in here. So I need to fix this staining part. Now there's several ways of doing this, but I think the best way to do this is actually just using a normal brush. So I'm going to pick my low copy. I'm going to hit the B key to get a normal brush, just a regular brush, not a clone stamp tool, just the B key for brush. And mine keeps jumping back. I don't know why. I think I've got some bug that's happening in my Photoshop. Anyway, smaller brush. Want to make sure that this is a completely soft brush. Blending mode needs to be set to normal. But now you're going to employ flow. Keep your opacity up at 100%, but take your flow way down. I'm going to take it down to like 4 or 5%, somewhere in there. Come down here, and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you this. Watch my screen when I do this, and then I'm going to show it to you in real time. I'll show it to you with both these layers on. I'm going to sample the color of her skin that's right below this, and then I'm just going to paint across this area that's got too much red in it. So holding down my option key, I click and I sample just that color, and then I'm just going to start scrubbing along here. Again, because I've got a low flow, it allows me to bring that in slowly. So I'm going to, you can see it's gone now. If I take a look at my frequency separation group, I'm going to turn everybody else back on. This is now the difference in here. Again, I'm going to turn off of my frequency separation work and then back on. You can see I not only have smoothed the skin out, but I've evened the tone out as well. Does this make sense to everybody what's going on? So it's this constant feeling of those tones, of keeping those parts different. So I'm going to show you one last trick to do on this. So I want to come over to the other side of her face. So I'm out now on the right side of her face, and you can see there's a darker shadow that's kind of running along the inside of her nose. This is the work that you would have been doing last week using the high tonal layer, or I'm sorry, not the high tonal, the tonal layer that had a tonal layer retouching large area, trying to smooth out those skin tones. So we're going to do it using this part right here. I'm going to try to fix this part here, but I'm going to do one last brush, and it is the mixer brush. So if you come over to your brush, over to your tool palette, click on the brush drop down. At the very bottom, you should have mixer brush tool. Does anybody not have this? All right, mixer brush tool. Then up at the palette that's up at the top, and again, if you go back, if you can't remember how to set this thing up, the settings are right here. So there's a PDF in the split frequency folder that talks about the mixer brush settings. If you take a look at the mixer brush settings, this will tell you how you are supposed to set this thing up to do your split frequency work. So I'm going to go back into here. So this is the way you want to have the tool set up. So up at the very top, for the hardness of this brush right here, we're actually going to leave it at a 0% hardness. For the coming across here, you'll see that there is a swatch here. This swatch is actually showing you the color that you're going to paint with. Leave it for the time being right now. Next to it, just to the right of this, there are two icons. One of them is supposed to look, if they're dark like this one right here, it means that it's been pressed. If it's light like this one, it means it hasn't been pressed. You want to make sure that the one just to the right of your color swatch has not been pressed in, so it should have the lighter gray background around it. And then for the one to the right of that, you want to make sure that it is pressed in. So again, you can see if you click on it, it unpresses it. If you click on it, it turns darker. So if you have this part set up correctly, you should only see the transparent checkerboard in your color swatch. Does anybody have anything other than a checkerboard? If for some reason you do, click on this first icon and then click on it again to get rid of it, but you should end up with this clear checkerboard. So what the mixer brush does is the mixer brush is a tool that was designed to work like a natural media, like an oil painting brush. It's supposed to be like a paintbrush that you would use on canvas. So typically if you think about the way a tool works on canvas is that you pick up brush, paint off of your little palette, and you put it on the canvas and you make strokes with it, whatever. And as you continue to stroke, you begin to run out of paint. It'll begin to fade. But then when you go to actually pick up more color, there's some color that's residual on your brush. And so when you go to grab more color, if it's the same, it's no big deal. If it's a different color, you end up mixing those colors together, and this can turn into be a real mess. What we're doing here is we're saying, with every single stroke, I want to clean my brush. That way we don't run into any residual color. So if we move from one area to another to shift color, we don't bring with it a legacy color, because our brush is being completely cleaned every single time we make a stroke. Make sense? Okay. In terms of how we control the brush, you want to keep the wetness at 20%. That gives us a relatively good mix on our brush. So it's basically how wet is your ink, or is your paint. The load we're going to leave at 100%. That's again how much paint you're loading up in your brush. We're loading it completely. The mix on here is also 100%, meaning that when we go to our destination, we want to mix the color on our brush completely with our target area. And then mix, you're going to leave that at 100%. And then flow works somewhere between 20 and 60% here. So flow controls how fast this whole action happens. So in my case, I'm going to set mine to 40%. Sometimes you can go higher with your flow if you're getting really frustrated, but nonetheless, you'll sort of see what's actually happening here. And then just watch my screen. Don't do this. Watch my screen. I'm going to show you how this guy works. I'm going to do this without using, just being able to look at my, just my low copy here by itself. So you can see there's an area of darkness in here that's got kind of red in it. Then there's a sort of a shadow area in here. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to take an area here that's lighter in color. I'm going to click and drag, and you should see that just brought some of that color right into this area. So I'm simply going to click and drag, and I'm just clicking and dragging like this. And this blends and mixes all of that color. So this is what my image looks like without it, and that's what it looks like with it. Does that make sense, everybody, what just went on here? So I'm going to go back and undo all of my mixer brush work, and then I'm going to show it to you in real time with everybody else on. No, you don't. The brush is set up to do it automatically for you. So I'm just working on this area right here. I'm in my low copy, and again, I'm just clicking and dragging across this area, and it's lifting up all of that color. And now if I use my frequency separation on and off, you can see it got rid of that dark area. Does this make sense, everyone? Are we good on this part? All right, I want you to close this image up really quickly. There's one other I want to look at really fast before you go. So in that same frequency separation image folder, there is another one in here called Wrinkled Green Skirt. If you can open this one up and say okay to that. So what we've got in here are wrinkles in the skirt, but then if you take a look, there's also texture in the fabric of this skirt. How would you guys remove the wrinkles? Well, if you're using the tonal frequency, you could try to come in and actually lighten all the shadows. That would be one way of doing it, but you guys already know how long tonal frequency actually works. Is that what you really want to do? Probably not, right? So again, what I want to do is I want to keep the detail of the fabric, but I want to lose the shadows and the highlights that make up all these giant areas of wrinkle, right? So do this with me. We're going to split this guy again. So background copy, Command J, double click on the middle layer and call it low. Double click on the high layer, or the top layer, and call it high. Turn off the eyeball for high, select the low layer, and then I'm going to move in so that I can really see. I'm going to zip in here so that I can see. So I'm in at like a 200% on my screen. I want to be able to see the stitching. I want to be able to see the texture of the fabric. I want to be able to see all of that part because that's what I'm going to try to lose in the beginning. So with your layer, low layer selected, up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur, and I'm going to start with a Gaussian blur of 1. And basically when I'm doing this 1 and I want to do jumps and I don't want to go to like 1.1 and 1.2, just keep your finger on the delete key and hit delete to get rid of the 1 and go to a 2. Hit delete and go to a 3. I've still got all the stitching. This isn't going to help me. Delete, go to 4. At 4, I begin to lose all of the stitching. I've got some sewing marks, pock marks, but if you take a look at all that white stitching, for the most part, all of that's gone. So again, this is just a coincidence. 4 is not a magic number. I know it's the one that we used on the last one. Your blur could be a 10. Your blur could be a 1. Your blur could be a 20. It's all dependent on the resolution of your image. But this looks correct for me, so I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. Then I'm going to turn on my high layer. I'm going to make it active. I'm going to turn on the eyeball. I'm going to come up to my image menu, down to apply image. In the drop down layer at the very top, I'm going to pick my low layer. In the blending mode, blending modes are sticky between starts of Photoshop. So because I had subtract before, it's subtract now. If you quit Photoshop and start it up again, it will go back to multiply. You would just have to pick this as subtract, a scale of 2, an offset of 128, and 100% opacity, and say okay to that. Change the blending mode of your high layer now from normal down to linear light. Click on the low layer and hit Command J to make a safety copy of that. Click on your high layer and hit Command J to make a safety copy of that. Change the blending mode of your high copy from linear light back up to normal. And then finally hover your cursor between high copy and high. Hold down your Option key and click to clip it over. Then finally hold down your Shift key and click all of them. So again, low, low copy, high, and high copy are all been selected. Up to the little pancake menu that's to the right hand side of your layers palette. Click on the drop down menu and say new group from layers and type in FS and say OK. Then turn FS on and off. If you see any change, you fucked it up. If you don't see a change, you're good to go. So then I'm going to zip back out. Has everybody got this split now? Anybody not? Are we good? Okay, I'm going to open up frequency separation. I am going to hold down my Option key and click on the eyeball next to low copy because I just want to work on the low layer by itself. And then I'm going to zoom in here and take a look. And you can see in here now what we're really up against. I mean, the thing that's causing the wrinkles are these highlights and shadows. I need to suppress the highlights and shadows. So I'm going to start using my tablet, and I'm also going to start using the mixer brush. So I'm going to come over and select the mixer brush at the bottom. Make sure that low copy is selected so that we can be painting on that layer. I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger. And what I'm going to do is, you can see I've got a shadow right here with a highlight that's sitting on the top. And then I've got sort of just a regular normal tone that's underneath this. I'm going to start working my way with a mixer brush up into all of this. So I'm simply going to click, and I'm just repeatedly clicking back and forth. Then I'm going to stop at that point, and I'm going to grab some of the tone that's above this and pull it down into the highlight. Then again, I'm going to, at this stage of the game, I need to bring that highlight tone back in more. So I'm going to go to a regular brush, not my mixer brush, but just a regular brush. Again, this should still be set up. I've got, again, a very soft brush, normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 4% flow. I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger. And then I'm just going to sample a normal color of green out here. So holding down my Option key, I'm going to sample a normal color of green. And then I'm just going to start scrubbing over this area that I need to actually lift. And so I've actually made that sort of a normal green. I can also hit that same color for the highlight that's on the top. Do not only use a single color. Sample another color now that's also that sort of mid-green, and I'm actually going to paint across all this area up in here that's actually that shadow part. I still need to get more tone on this highlight, so I'm going to go back to my mixer brush. And again, now work up a large way across all of this to get rid of all of that, to blend out all of that detail. Now take a look at what's just happened. If we turn on our, I'm going to turn everybody else back on. So now if I turn my frequency layer on and off, sorry, let me turn my very bottom one on so you can see a before and after. Bless you. Frequency on and off, you can see it's just removed the wrinkle. But look at this when you move in. All the tone of all the texture of the fabric is still there. Does this make sense what's going on? Are we good on this part? All right, so I'm going to work my way down on this. So if I go back to my low copy, I'm just turning it, I'm just working on the low copy alone. You can see I've got a lot of this sort of texture here. I've got the same thing that's on the blue, on the tan side over here. But my brush is only picking up tone when I make a stroke, so I don't need to change anything. I'm using my mixer brush still. I'm just going to start working my way down across this. I'm just painting across all of these guys. And I'm killing all of those highlights and shadows. I'm just going to work my way completely down this. Mixer brush the whole time. Start to work up in here, areas where I know I've got to actually get rid of that shadow part. I'm going to leverage using my highlight part to do it. Don't remove absolutely everything, otherwise it'll look like just a flat piece of something. But that's actually taking care of that side. I'm actually going to go after my other side right now. So I'm going to take off on this a little bit so you guys just sort of follow along. I'm going to use a combination of mixer brush and regular brush. In areas in here where I feel like I've got these weird highlights, I'm going to go back to a regular brush. I'm going to sample something that's close to that highlight but a little bit darker and just scrub in the highlights. I can also use these to scrub out a little bit more of the shadow. I'm going to double click on the hand. I'm going to turn everybody else back on. And this is what I've just done. Is that, Haley, a good what the fuck?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is insane. Look at this, guys. You've still got all the detail in here, all the, son of a. You've got all the detail is still in the fabric. Look at this. All the detail is still in the fabric. I haven't lost any of the stitches. I haven't lost any of that. But all of the wrinkling in this, not all of it, but again, I've still got to work on stuff at the very top. But the lion's share of this is gone. Is this making sense what's going on here? Okay, last thing. How do you then deal with something you fucked up, right? I told you you've got these blank layers. Well, this is how you deal with it. Let's say I want to bring some of these wrinkles back into here. So come down to your low layer. This is the layer that we haven't done anything to. I'm going to hit the lasso key and just select a big area of this right here. I'm going to jump that to its own layer, Command J. I'm going to then bring this patch up above the low copy, and it's all back. And now all I need to do is Command E to merge it down, and I've restored all of those wrinkles that I wanted to get rid of. Did that make sense, everybody, what I just did? Wow, and I've finished with a minute to spare. Questions about this?
So far, what do you think would be a reasonable time for us to do this week's assignment?
No idea. I don't even know what this week's assignment is. Oh, the retouching thing. I looked at that, but there could be other things. I have no... You guys think I actually look at this stuff? I'm not in this class. I teach it. I'm not on the other end of this.
Yeah, so what do you think? 3 hours?
Less time than it took you to do the tonal work.
So let's say it's 3 hours.
Let's say it's 3 hours.
Yeah, I can go to New York this weekend.
Good. Questions about this? Are we good on this part? Is it sort of making sense? This, again, if you get this frequency thing down, guys, just again, the thing to remember in this, detail and texture, high. Tone, color, and volume, low. I'll see you next week. Everybody got it on the sign-in sheet, right?
Can you double check that my assignment got turned into?
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to show everybody what got turned in.